Hey everyone. A major focus of the channel is discovering the personalized recipe that optimizes biomarkers of as many organ systems as possible, which is an approach that I expect will minimize disease risk, maximize health, and potentially longevity. With that in mind, today we have two experts in that field, Doctors Nathan Price and Sherry Zhang. Dr. Price is a professor and co-director of the Center for Human Healthspan at the Buck Institute for Research on Aging, and Dr. Zhang is the co-founder of Healthspan Horizons at the Buck. Doctors Price and Zhang are using AI, multi-omic profiling, and longitudinal tracking to map how age-related diseases emerge and correspondingly how we can use systems biology to optimize health. So with that, welcome Nathan and Sherry, and let's get into the presentation.
Fantastic. Thanks, Mike. So good to be with you. All right. Well, it's wonderful to be here with everyone, and I'm excited to share this time also with my colleague Sherry Zhang, who together we've been working on a program called Healthspan Horizons, and talk about some of the work that we're doing at the Buck Institute for Research on Aging, as Mike mentioned. So I'll go ahead and start, I guess, with AI. So this is one of the things that is on all of our minds these days, moving incredibly rapidly. There's all kinds of new capabilities, new worries, new concerns, all kinds of things across the map. And I'm not going to address all of those. But the one avenue that I'll come into here is just that the abundance of health would be, in my mind, the greatest application of AI to humanity. One of the interesting things is you think about something like an exponentially rising capability is sort of the limits of human imagination about what are the kind of things that we would want that are impossible today, and what would we most want to achieve. And I think it's pretty hard to imagine anything that is more meaningful and more resonant with us than more years that we can feel fully alive, more years as ourself. And that's what we really want to achieve. And so, are there ways that we can leverage these kind of technologies to move us forward towards health span? So I'll start here as well on what is aging. We're of course all familiar with the passage of time and getting older. It's a dominant part of a lot of our lives, of course. This is my favorite practical definition of aging, which is just that if we plot the likelihood that we'll die from all kinds of different causes as you go forward in time, there's a slope that goes up. There's one lecture from my undergrad, which for whatever reason, it's probably the only lecture I remember like crystal clear for some reason. But there was this interesting lecture when I was in my engineering courses that light bulbs don't age. And what do we mean by that? And the idea there is just that a light bulb is just as likely to blow out. Talking about these old incandescent light bulbs, it's got a little copper filament in them. They're just as likely to blow out on day one as they are on day 30,001. Just as a function of the background electrical grid, there's no like ramp up. And so as we think about this as a definition of aging, it gives us something very quantitative. So if we talk about making real progress on aging fundamentally, what we would expect or want to see is that all of the slope of these lines gets flatter and flatter so that there's less difference in our likelihood of mortality or loss of energy and vitality as we get into our 60s, 70s, 80s as when we're younger. It was also interesting when I first became a longevity related researcher, an aging researcher, how you'd get these different perspectives. Some people love this idea. Other people, I was quite surprised, are quite against this notion. They kind of don't really wish you success in this endeavor and so forth, which was sort of interesting. And of course, the reason for that is that people have a very different view of what this means. And there was actually a quote from Seneca the Younger in a book called The Moral Epistles that I was listening to on a way up to give a talk in New York some years ago. And he put it in a way that really struck me, which was, for it makes a great deal of difference whether a man is lengthening his life or his death. And this, I think, is so interesting, as we contemplate whether we're really lengthening that period of life and vibrancy, or that sometimes quite all too often terrible time at the end of life. What we really want to do is to be focusing on that vibrancy, that keeping of health for as long as possible. This leads us to think in medicine about how do we recreate healthcare that's not so focused only on disease manifestation and trying to respond after the fact, but how do we be very proactive, starting from understanding deeply risk, starting from genomics and other sources to understand risk. How do we augment our resilience? How do we understand those early transition phases and move back towards wellness and maintain a resilient state for as long as possible? And we wrote a paper on this for Cell Systems recently with the title, We Wait for Disease to Shout. What if we listened when biology whispered? And I really think that's a lot of the future, especially as we start getting AI and other tools to try to understand subtler signals and how do we intervene, much earlier and understand how do we maintain health as deeply as possible. Alzheimer's, I think, is one of the really great examples of where this holds a lot of promise. Uh, the drug space for Alzheimer's disease is mostly cluttered with failures, as we know. There's a couple of things that have been FDA approved. They're very costly and their effect size is relatively modest. In contrast to that, if you look at the problem from a prevention standpoint, those activities have actually been quite successful. And there's at least some degree to which you can push off things like dementia for years into the future. The most probably best studies that have been done in Alzheimer's and dementia thus far, the finger study, and now just recently done in the US called the pointer study. And in fact, it's estimated that for certain populations where the genetic drive isn't so strong, for example, the Hispanic population in the United States, that roughly 45% of all dementias could be preventable by lifestyle interventions. So there's a lot of space here. If we think about this just from the biology, reasons behind this are quite clear. If you're in late stage dementia, it means a whole ton of your neurons have died. Maybe you've lost billions, maybe way more than that in terms of different synapses that have gone away. The notion that you could take like a small molecule drug and like recreate that today, it's probably totally fanciful. We don't know how to do that. No one knows how. However, that process of stopping neurons from dying, to be able to make sure that they stay energetically healthy, that there's enough to kind of make them persist, those kind of things are very doable. I wrote this piece for the LA Times on this because we have spent something, there's different estimates, anywhere between tens of billions to hundreds of billions. I saw one estimate as high as $1 trillion that had been spent over the decades trying to solve late stage Alzheimer's. And yet, what we really need to do much more is kind of focus on prevention, where we get a lot more ROI. So this is this concept of focusing on wellness, which I've been doing along with my colleague Lee Hood in the early days, and now driving forward with Sherry and others at the Buck, has really become much more mainstream. Right? There's probably many of you listening to this that are kind of like, this has become something that a lot of us are thinking about. And I loved this report from Deloitte in 2022, which I've started calling the $2 trillion pivot. But basically, it is a forecast from, this is one of these big industry consulting firms that a lot of the big money players listen to. So it has some influence. But if you look at, the current healthcare system where we spend the vast majority of our dollars on treating sickness, they're forecasting that by 2040, not so far away now, that a vast majority of that spending is going to be moving towards the promotion of health and the restoration of health. So we're seeing an incredible shift, and a $2 trillion, shift in the economy is massive. So that has incredible tailwinds for a lot of the things that, many of us want to do in terms of building businesses and improving healthcare and driving science that can aim towards the expansion of health span. And we just see incredible investment going into this space at this time, and that's very exciting. I also wrote this piece for a Scientific American publication, Evidence-Based Wellness Emerges as an Industry. Just going through 50 or so different startups. There's so many of these in this space that are coming about, and so we see all the activity, the movement. So it really started as kind of a pinprick some years ago, but has gained a lot of momentum. And we see this very strongly in the in the commercial space as well, including at Thorne, where I'm chief science officer and so forth. So there's a lot of movement here. For this reason, I'll argue that AI's greatest health opportunity isn't actually disease, as important as that is, and I don't want to minimize that in any way, but it is health span. And it's the opportunity for us to really drive forward and expand, as I've already said, I suppose, to expand health in positive ways. I've been involved in this for quite some time. The early days, Lee Hood and I started a project and ultimately around a concept that we called scientific wellness, which was the idea of trying to understand health in the same deep scientific way that we understand disease, and to build out lots of data that would sit here in the earliest phases, at beginning of wellness towards onset of disease and so forth. This began in 2013, and Lee and I wrote a book for Harvard University Press a couple years ago that kind of chronicles that decade and all the things that we learned from starting to unlock a lot of data on individuals of this kind. And a lot of that I'll walk you through at the beginning of the talk today. So scientific wellness, we ultimately got about 5,000 people to go through these kind of programs and generating data from people who are, for the most part, well, right? Just starting from a general population. We were gathering data such as whole genome sequencing and then SNP chips on a subset of those individuals. Labs, about 1,200 different lab tests that we were doing 2 to 3 times per year. Gut microbiome, same thing. Continual tracking with wearable devices, the idea that you would have a database of actionable possibilities to grow over time. And then we create personal dense dynamic data clouds or deep phenotyping, basically just gathering a lot of dense data on some thousands of people over the course of about 4 years that we ran this in order to try to understand a little bit more about wellness. So I want to dive into those data just a little bit and talk about some of the things that we've learned. And then I'll transition that to how modern AI tools are allowing us to deliver this in better ways and hand it off to Sherry at that point. So let me start first on just a little snippet about what we've done with genetics. There's a lot more than I'll show you here, but I just want to give people a taste of what you can learn off these kind of data. So I'll start with some other people's work here, starting with this terrific science paper from Uri Alan's lab that came out recently that a lot of us paid attention to, which is that the heritability of lifespan is about 50%. There's different estimates, but I'll take this one. And so that means that your genome makes an incredible difference to your lifespan and your health span. Now, if you go to a primary care physician and you ask yourself, okay, how much do we use the genome in primary care today? And the answer to a first approximation is 0. We basically don't use it at all, despite it being half of the game. So that is a big miss in my view. Another great, oh, I'm missing, shoot, was a slide I was really hoping to show here. So I'll just describe it. I don't know why it's not here. I don't know if it's hidden or something. That's weird. Anyway, so another study that came out in the journal Circulation showed for LDL cholesterol, for example, that if you look at predictability for LDL cholesterol and you stratify people by genetic risk for coronary artery disease, if you have low genetic risk for coronary artery disease, the correlation of LDL cholesterol to prediction for you is 0. It has absolutely no correlative ability at all. And yet we use it for millions of people who have actually either low known CAD risk or unknown risk, more likely. However, if you have moderate to high risk for coronary artery disease, LDL cholesterol has a linear relationship. It's a strong biomarker. It matters. So the point of that being that there's all kinds of ways that we should contextualize interpretation of biomarkers by the genome that are very clinically relevant already today. In our own work, we also looked at LDL cholesterol. We did a bunch of biomarkers, but in interest of time, I'm just going to take you through this one. And so here, what we find is that if you look in the blood, so on the y-axis here, this is a normalized level of LDL cholesterol in the blood. And then we just bucket all these thousands of people into 5 groups from low genetic risk to high genetic risk for having LDL cholesterol in this case. And here, the R squared accounts for about 12% of the variance. Um, and so you can see here that even if I don't know anything about your diet, your age, like literally nothing is being taken into account here except for um, that genetic piece. So there's a signal there. Now the question is, does it matter if you have elevated LDL cholesterol because of genome or not? And so what we saw was that if we took people through a wellness program, these are just personalized programs with coaches, so everyone's doing kind of different things, but in general, they're trying to get their lifestyle locked in. They're trying to improve their health in a deeper way. And what we saw was that for about 40% of people that had this lower genetic risk, we saw that individuals were able to significantly lower their LDL cholesterol during the course of time as they went through that lifestyle program. However, if they were in these upper groups here, presenting again thousands of people, we saw no statistically significant for them to lower their LDL cholesterol at all. And so this I think is really important because there have been many studies that had looked at lifestyle and effects on LDL cholesterol, and you kind of get a mixed bag. It has a subtle signal and so forth. What this showed is that the genome can separate out big responders from non-responders pretty clearly. And so it actually introduces something which I'll argue should be a new category of variable that we use across medicine. And that is something that we call the modifiable gap. So if I take 2 different individuals and they're both measured at the same level of, we'll stay on our example here of LDL cholesterol, and they have, let's say, a clinically concerning reference range. One of them may be genetically predicted to be high and another low. And so what that does is that where you have a gap, a larger gap, this indicates that you have more modifiability in that particular biomarker. So if it's up here because of genetics, then that says we can't change that so much other than hitting it with a drug. Here, there's a lot to play with in terms of lifestyle and environment. So that non-genetic component can be modified by intervention. And so, the idea here is that the bigger that modifiable gap, the more likely you are to see movement in that biomarker when you attempt to get healthier and take lifestyle changes to address that. And in fact, we found that to be true. We applied this across a whole bunch of different biomarkers, and we asked another interesting question, which was, does the predictive power of the size of that gap, does it get stronger as you get more and more genetic evidence? In other words, as your ability to predict that biomarker gets better by having more and more genomes and deeper analysis? And the answer to that, at least in the preliminary data for all the ones we've done so far, appears to be yes. Spearman-Rowe here, 0.76, relatively small number of cases still, but you can see that the slope overall is upwards. This is important too because even for LDL cholesterol, the model that I showed you in the paper we published accounted for 12% of the variance. Today, you can actually build a better model for that, which accounts more for like 21% of variance, I think is about the latest paper. And so you actually get tighter on that gap. And a bit counterintuitive thing that comes out of that I think is really interesting is it means that even as we start understanding more and more how genetics predicts health, that can lead to a certain kind of fatalism, right? You might say, well, if genetics is really predicting and I can't do anything. But a little bit counterintuitively, actually, the tighter you get on genetics, the better you understand the modifiable component. The more you can hone in on it, the smarter you can be. So I actually think that we shouldn't be fatalistic about that at all. I think that it gives us a lot of clues into how we can optimize our life over time. Because even when we say the genome accounts for half of the variance, that's looking backwards, of course, right? That's saying of what we have observed, how much can we attribute to the genome? That does not tell us that if we understand the genome in context and we build systems to optimize health going forward, that we can't do a lot better than that. So I think that's really an important point. Okay, so that's what I wanted to say. Just a little snippet about what we can learn from genomics. I'm going to shift now and talk a little bit about the microbiome and metabolism. And again, what have we learned from looking at thousands of people? So, I was expecting a slightly different slide here as well. So here, what we found is that the gut microbiome actually changes as you get older. And so right around about age 50, and I'd have the data slide here, which was expected to have here. The Around age 50, there starts to be an uptick in how different your microbiome is from everybody else's. And so in that case, what we find is that there's this divergence if you stay healthy, where your microbiome becomes increasingly unique, right? And we published this in Nature Metabolism in 2021. Oh, we do have the other one. Okay, so here then we have, so that's what I just said here around age 50, it's ticking up. And so the microbiome becomes more unique as we age. However, there are core functions that remain steady in healthy aging. And so what that means is that even though your microbiome becomes increasingly different from another person's microbiome as you get older, there are certain metabolic transformations that occur in everybody that end up being important to health. They're just sort of solved in different ways. Another study that we did was to look at the microbiome as the only measure that was predictive of weight loss. So as individuals are going through a wellness program, right, a small minority of them went on to lose weight and keep it off. And we went at baseline from that initial data and just said, is there any signal that seemed to be correlated with that or predictive of that at baseline? And what we saw was that surprisingly to me, there was no signal in the metabolome once we corrected for BMI itself, which is already a good predictor. Proteins, again, didn't predict. Asking people what they ate started to trend a little bit better, but also was not statistically significant. And then the only thing that was the gene content of the microbiome. And the most important element of that was as follows. So if you have certain genes in your microbiome, if you had genes that appeared that you would be more likely to break down to break down complex carbohydrates into simple sugars, those individuals had a much harder time losing weight. However, if you had a microbiome that would more likely break down the acids, including butyrate, which is a GLP-1 stimulant, those individuals had a much better time losing weight. And so as you can see here, the correlation was 0.3. And so it was highly statistically significant, but that was the only thing that we found in the data on our initial analyses, at least, that looked predictive for who would go on to lose weight. And we published that in M Systems in 2021. We've also looked at properties like BMI, and BMI is a very commonly used health metric. It's most relevant across populations and so forth, right? Just a measure of obesity, basically. But in this case, what we were able to see was that we did a regression, very much like you would do a biological age calculation, and regressed it against biological BMI. And here what we found was that we could leverage all these data to create a metabolic health score related to BMI that would tell you, in general, like, if you were more or less healthy than your BMI score would indicate, and validated that to show that this ended up being more predictive than BMI alone. Published that in Nature Medicine in 2023. And then the final thing I'll say about the microbiome is that it's also strongly associated with drug outcomes. So we looked at the case of statins, because that's the most common drug that we had in our population. And what was interesting is we just did an unsupervised clustering into four broad groups of microbiomes and found that in one of these groups that was rich in Bacteroides, that there seemed to be a doubling in the lowering of LDL cholesterol observed with that microbiome compared to the other groups. Um, and conversely, one of the downsides of taking a statin is you get a 9% increase in the rate of diabetes. And we saw that increases in diabetes-related markers happened in two of the microbiome groups and not in the other two. So, this is, preliminary. It's observational. It's observation in thousands of people. But what was interesting is that it indicates that the microbiome probably plays an important role both in the efficacy of statins as well as side effect profile. And this is something that is getting explored more and more in the drug space as we go forward. And then the final thing I'll say off of these data is we did also use these to generate a biological age calculation. A lot of different kinds of ways to do this, a lot of variability. I expect most people are sort of familiar with these. Just in case some of our listeners aren't, the biological age is basically an age that your body says you are, as opposed to the age the calendar says that you are. And from a method approach, basically it is, if all I could see was all your data, how old would I think that you are, right? Basically. If it's done properly, and I'll explain what I mean by that, it can be tracked over time. So I think it's an interesting way to measure progress. And you can do it on all kinds of different measurements, all kinds of different things in your body. You're going to get different answers, depending on those that you go into. The way we did it is we use something called the Clamara-Duval algorithm. You don't need to know the details of this other than one important thing, which is that it forces the slope of the line that you fit to these data to be very close to 1. So what that means is that there's an expectation in a population that you would tick up 1 year per year on this measure. If you don't do it that way, then there's not such an expectation. But if you do it this way, then you get that. So then what we wanted to do was just check to see what would be relevant from here. You can always fit a line to a data, right? So the question is it relevant in some way? Is it telling us something interesting? We developed a series of biological ages, which are shown here, one for metabolites, one based on proteins, one based on clinical labs, and one that used all of them together. So there's 4 biological ages per condition. And what I wanted to look at here is just to see, as a sanity check, how related was biological age to disease in this population or different conditions. And the main thing I want you to notice is that there are asterisks here that indicate statistical significance. And what I want you to notice especially is just to see that every single one of these is on the right side of the line, and there are none of them on the left side of the line. So what that means is that in every single case where there was a statistically significant difference, disease was associated with higher biological age. And we saw no conditions that were associated with having a lower biological age. All right, we saw a bunch where there was no signal, but we didn't see any that went counterintuitive. So that, at a high level then, that told me, all right, this is measuring something that is meaningful in a sense, because it is, having a higher biological age is highly associated with disease. I think more interestingly, we also looked at people going through the program over time and then evaluated in these interventions as they were going through and trying to improve their wellness, just what happened to them. They weren't coached to the score. The score was developed actually right really at the end of the program, but we went retrospectively and just observed what had happened to people in the population. And so what we saw was that overall biological age estimate decreased by 0.16 years per year. You can see broad error bars, so a lot of variability, but on average it was negative 0.16. Women did particularly well. You can see they were their biological age estimate decreased by half a year instead of the expectation that they'd go up by a year. So that was an improvement of 1.5 years. Men didn't do as well as the women. They went up by 0.2 years in biological age per year, but still much better than the expected 1 year per year. So it showed then that if you're going through doing things that we think of as being positive to health, that the biological age estimate tended to move down. So those were two important signals, and that was in data from over 3,500 people that we published in the journals of gerontology. Okay, so I've taken you through some of the things that we learned. We learned a ton more than this, but I showed a few highlights as we went through here. And now I want to start jumping into today and where we're going, what we're building, and in particular, the main thing I want you to think about is all those pieces that I started to delineate, and we could get into it in way more detail. But as soon as you start thinking about your genome and your microbiome and all of your blood and how these things are interacted, it's incredibly complicated. And that used to be a pretty severe barrier to implementing like deep intelligence of utilizing all of these kind of things. And now, for reasons that we all probably understand, it's not so much because AI tools and some of these things that we can build are incredible platforms for delivering deep personalization as long as they can be informed by real science, deep context, and measurements that are necessary to really understand what's going on. And so in my lab at Buck, we're focusing on two primary AI systems that we're building. One which is called Compass, which you're going to get a chance to see today, which is an N of one health intelligence engine. So how do we apply all the kind of things that I just walked you through to you as a person? And then Synthesizer, which is really these virtual AI agents doing science. So Synthesizer is attempting to automate the process that my team has gone through over the last 13 years or so, analyzing these data and pulling out insights and writing papers and generating figures and all those kind of things to where we can now automate a whole lot of that process all the way through, from question to analysis plan to executing the plan to generating the figures to writing the paper. And as we all know, like if I'd said that 5 years ago, it would sound ludicrous. And now it just sounds normal to all of us. So it's pretty amazing. But we have built a system that sits on top of this Aravel scientific wellness or the scientific wellness data set that enables us to make those kind of analyses. So with that, I'm going to turn the time over to Sherry to talk about kind of the new initiative, and then I'll come back and demo the Compass system for people at the end. All right, Sherry, over to you.
Thank you. Thank you, Michael, for having us, and thank you, everyone, whoever joining us today watching this program. So Nathan and I spend our days thinking about a deceptively simple question. What would it take to add not just years to life, but life to those years? At Healthspan Horizons that Nathan just mentioned, our mission is to make Healthspan computable. Thank you, Nathan. We believe the science has reached a point where we can begin transforming fragmented health information into something far more useful, which is continuous healthspan intelligence that helps people like you and me understand where they are today, where they're headed, and how to improve that trajectory over time. But before I showed you what we're building, let's talk about why we believe it's needed. Now, Nathan has taken us through the science with remarkable nuance. I'd like to build on that by exploring what it means at the societal and personal levels. Next, please. Humanity has accomplished something extraordinary, as you know. Over the past century, we've dramatically extended lifespan. But healthy lifespan hasn't kept pace. So that's the health span we're talking about. Many people now spend the last decade or more of life managing chronic disease, declining function, or loss of independence. That's the health span gap, as shown in this graph here, which is about approximately 13 years in this country. And it's one of the defining scientific and societal challenges of our generation. The good news is the story doesn't have to end here, right? Next, please. One additional healthy year has enormous value, not just economically, but personally. It's another year of independence, another year of traveling with family, another year of doing the things that make life meaningful. That's why extending health span has become such an important scientific goal. Ironically, we're trying to solve this problem at a time when we have more health information than ever before. Next, please. Many of us, especially the people on the call, have genomic data. We have smartwatches, electronic health records, laboratory tests, and so on. Yet none of these pieces really talk to one another. We don't have a coherent picture of our own health span. We have lots of data, but surprisingly little understanding of it. And that's where the opportunity begins. Next, please. The exciting and good news is that health span isn't fixed, it's actually modifiable. Large longitudinal studies consistently show that healthy behaviors can add years of healthy life. The opportunity isn't simply living longer, it's changing the trajectory while there's still time. So the question becomes, can we measure that trajectory well enough to change it? And we think we can. To me, this is one of the most exciting ideas in longevity. Health span isn't something abstract. It's not an abstract concept. It's measurable, it's learnable, and increasingly it's becoming computable. The real challenge isn't whether we have enough information. It's whether we can responsibly connect the pieces into something useful. And if we're going to do that, we're talking about health information, we're talking about genomic information, the most private information anyone can own, right? So we have to build trust into the system from the very beginning. So traditionally, research dealing with health data collected everyone's information into one place, so it's centralized. But increasingly, that approach doesn't scale anymore. Privacy expectations have evolved, changed. Regulations have become more complex. Technology has evolved. So at Healthspan Horizons, we're building around a different philosophy, which is data stay where they belong and intelligence travels. That is the idea behind the federated AI system. With that foundation, let me introduce what we're building. So this is a Healthspan Horizons at Buck. It's a collaboration anchored at the Buck Institute that brings together science, AI, and longitudinal research. Our goal isn't simply to study aging, it's to build an intelligence engine that continuously learns from millions of health experiences and translates that knowledge back into practical guidance for individuals. Ultimately, everything we're building comes down to answering three simple questions I believe all of us share. Next, please. Where am I today? Where am I headed? And perhaps most importantly, what should I do next? Right? So for most of us, those questions aren't answered or answerable by a single blood test or smartwatch. They require bringing together many different dimensions of health, and that leads to the next idea of ours. Health doesn't come from any single data source. We know that. It emerges from how many different layers of information of health interact over time. Your genome tells us what's possible. Your clinical biomarkers tells us what's happening today. Your wearables show how you live every day. Your exposome captures the environment you are living in. And increasingly, molecular measurements help us understand what's happening beneath the surface before disease appears. The whispers, as you say, Nathan just introduced. Each layer tells part of the story, but only when they're integrated do they become a meaningful, coherent picture of individual healthspan. And that's exactly what we're building with Healthspan Compass AI. Instead of isolated reports, static reports that we are probably exposed to, we create one integrated picture that helps people understand not only what's happening today, but where their health is headed. So what does the that actually look like for someone using the platform? Um, so this is interface of Compass. You can consider it as the participant experience of Healthspan Horizons. Our goal isn't to show people more data; it's to make complex biology understandable and useful. Compass translates decades of biomedical research into personalized, easy to understand guidance. Behind the scenes, AI system integrates information across many different sources. But what participants experience is something much simpler. It is a trusted guide that helps them understand themselves better so that they can make more informed decisions about health over time. And let me introduce you to one example. Um, if you can forward. Thank you. Meet Elena. She's 48 years old, lives in Colorado, exercises regularly, wears a smartwatch, and gets routine lab work, and is trying to stay healthy for decades to come. She's still young, right? The interesting thing is, Elena doesn't actually need more health data. She already has plenty of it. What she really lacks is a way to connect those pieces into a coherent understanding of her future health. Compass begins by integrating her biology, her clinical data, her daily behaviors, and her environmental context. It compares her patterns with biologically similar individuals and identifies the factors she can actually change. Instead of overwhelming Elena with information, Compass helps her focus on the few actions most likely to improve her health span today and over time. And that's the transformation we're trying to create from fragmented health data to guided health trajectory. I would like to end, next slide, please. My part was an invitation. Today, we're building the very first version of Compass, but no healthspan platform becomes truly intelligent without learning from you, people. So this community is that Michael, you have built is exactly the kind of scientifically curious and engaged group we'd love to learn alongside as we build this. Nathan is going to demonstrate Compass in just a moment. If what you have heard or you see resonates with you, I invite you to scan this QR code, explore the demo, and tell us what you think. Your feedback will help shape where Compass and ultimately this platform, Healthspan Horizons, and goes next. I hope you're excited about this because extending healthy lifespan isn't something any one scientist, institution, or company will accomplish alone. It will take an entire community like this. We hope you'll be part of the journey. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Sherry. So let me pull up the demo site here just for a moment so I can show people what this looks like. All right. Share. Okay, you see that now? All right, so I'm just going to take people through one version of this. And again, the goal here, through this nonprofit research project in Healthspan Horizons that we're doing, is to try to take that complexity and make a lot of the insights that have been coming out of the science applicable on an individual basis. So this obviously built using tools from a lot of these fantastic large language models that we have. And also what you'll see is there's a compute layer associated with it so we can dive into data and try to understand this in different ways. So I'll just walk through a guided demo here. You could do this by just asking if you wanted to, but I'm just going to go through the guided demo to interest of time here. So first, we'll just ask a question. Can you show me where my health stands today? The system recognizes that contextually. It pulls up a tool that we've built called Health Status Snapshot. So this starts with some pretty table stakes kind of stuff, right? Clinical lab data against clinical ranges, clickable, that kind of thing. The next stage will be to do an analysis against others of his age. In this case, it's a 53-year-old man. So what the system will do is it will go into the data on thousands of people, right? And it will start creating distributions that are centered around him. So in this case, he can then see that in this particular marker, right, he's elevated, people 10 years younger, 10 years older, just like a way to start to evaluate this. This next, and you can do that, of course, for any of the markers and so forth that are here. The next one is more specific that I'm excited about because this is where we get into the gap analysis that I showed, and we show how do your measurements make sense in the context of your DNA. This I am very excited about because this sort of gap analysis is not available commercially. The science has been being done around this, but there's not a place that you can go and get this easily. And in fact, even for ourselves, this hasn't been like such an easy thing to have. So now we've got that, right? So in this case, fasting insulin, you can see here, this is the genetic prediction, and we do have confidence intervals on here, and then his actual level. So what this shows is that there's quite a big gap. There's room for improvement towards a target on fasting insulin, same with hemoglobin A1C, triglycerides, and so forth. So this we haven't had access to before. It will also highlight where he's beating his genetic prediction substantially. You'll notice these are LDL. This is, of course, because he went on a statin. Before being on the statin, he was basically at genetic prediction and then was able to hammer it down. For this individual, and this is all real data. For this individual, he had gone through our previous program for about 3 years. So we also had deep data of metabolomics, proteomics, things like that. So this just shows some of the sort of things that can be done. I already showed you like biological age calculation. This just shows his to him. Same with biological BMI, this metabolic score that I showed you. What's interesting here is that he has a BMI of 27.6, so he's a bit overweight. And then the biological BMI would indicate that, at least according to the deep data, we expect that his metabolic health is actually worse than we would expect by him just being overweight. You can also get into different measurements on the microbiome, although we haven't built this part out terribly much yet. So we can also look at changes over time. So you start to get a sense of a trajectory. Which is what is pulling up now. In David's case, he has 3 years of data. And so you can see here some improvements in hemoglobin A1C, in fasting insulin. HOMA-IR got a little better and then went backwards and so forth. But you get a sense for kind of just improvements in HDL cholesterol and things of that nature, so that you can get quite a lot. One piece we added on here, and this shouldn't infer correlation here or anything, but we did also layer on here by zip code, at least. We've also layered in different types of environmental data, so you can look at things like exposure to particulate matter or smoke or temperature or things of that nature. And so this is something that we're excited about. I was able to hire a really terrific expert, Dr. Kevin Cavanis out of the EPA recently, who's joined the team and is building out a big environmental aspect. So this is just the very beginnings of that. This also allows a person to dive in if they want to, understand more what's happening, in the at state levels and so forth, and just see, exposures and things of that over time. And then the biggest thing is then the synthesis. So you're able to take all this and then ask the question. In this case, it's like, what are my top personalized priorities? You'll see again that it recognizes that, pops open the tool, starts running a calculation, and then is able to uh, do some uh, elements that we hope will be relevant for people. So again, he's a 53-year-old man. And then here, the idea is to forecast, kind of in what range, given, current health state and trajectories, do we think that he starts having some moderate risk for, some negative, from diseases really starting to arise in his life. Gives him a summary again of like the healthy range of BMI. As I mentioned, he's somewhat overweight, and his blood suggests that he's actually he's more unhealthy than we would expect from just the being overweight. Why this matters, right? It walks him through, different conditions that are most at risk for, and gives reasons why, right? Systolic blood pressure persistently above 130, low HDL, elevated triglycerides, and so forth. So it maps this back. Uh, this then gives him, a summary of where he'll get the biggest return. This is again based on the genetic prediction versus different markers. So it takes that into account. And then since this is aimed at something being public and not at doctors in this case, everything here will be wellness and lifestyle. There won't be any, like medical advice of any kind. And so but here you'll see the kind of thing that can happen, like so, and he can click here saying this is something he'll do. You get a slight improvement in the trajectory. But here, right, replace refined carbs with legumes, intact grains, and vegetables. Okay, that's the kind of thing that, seems like overall good advice, but it does get very personalized in this sense. So your insulin dropped from 27.8 to 14.9. So it, talks to him about his history, a major win, some encouragement, but your DNA says it should sit around 9.4. Okay, so it gives him a target, right? There's a range, remaining gap, et cetera. It talks to him about the biomarkers that support that, and then the disease risks that could be reduced, and a time frame over which those biomarkers are actually movable. And you can see more and more about this. Some of these things too, like add resistance training 2 to 3 times a week, right? It'll give him specifics about why. The resistance training 2 to 3 times per week, that's not super specific. As we evolve this though, like one group we've talked to, they have like really advanced gyms, for example, where they have AI enabled exercises that people do. They do 1 billion a year too, so they've got a pretty good number of clients that go through there. But then you would be able to feed in data such as, how strong is your right bicep, how strong is your left calf, what's your balance. So all these kind of things like get, as you go forward, more and more and more depth that you can add into all these things. So anyway, so you start getting predictions of that nature, and so just start to give a personalized plan. You can do the same thing on environment or microbiome. But in essence, I just wanted to give people a taste of what this looks like. This is early innings, but we're excited because it's the kind of platform now that we can do a lot of computation. And then what we're really working on in the lab in particular is, to really pull together, not only, oh, what happened? Oops, sorry. Is to pull together not only the kind of things that we can do by, text-based analysis and so forth, but really to pull together a lot of what we can do on the computation layers beneath it. Because you can't just dump a genome into ChatGPT, right? You can't dump a proteome or a metabolome or these levels. And so it's really a whole architecture that goes into making those things interpretable. So I'll just close with this. Few problems touch every life. Health span optimization is one of them. You can either ignore it and it'll get optimized in a negative way, or you can really dive in and try to understand that. I want to thank all the members of the team in the lab that we've grown over the last almost 2 years now at the Buck Institute, and thank everyone for questions and And again, if you're interested in testing out the system yourself, and also just being aware of everything that's going on, yeah, you can do that at the QR code. Also at healthspanhorizons.org, you can sign up, via email. We put out content about everything that we learn and share that out, and then also first access to the AI systems when they become available. With that, happy to take any questions, and thank you so much.
Thanks, Nathan and Sherry. That was great. So just as a quick comment, so for people who don't know, and I'm guessing most people don't know because we're in the nitty-gritty of the computational biology and systems biology, but Lee Hood, if people want to do a deep dive, look up the name Lee Hood. So Lee has been on my radar for maybe as much as 30 years. And I can't remember if it was before I went to grad school or after. So I was thinking about, either going to grad school at the ISB or doing a postdoc afterwards. But the reason I didn't is because you guys were so computational heavy at that time. And I'm basically I'm the opposite of adept, whatever the word you want to choose to use. I'm a physiologist and biochemistry guy and applied science, applied health science. So anyway, Lee's been on my radar for a long time. So, okay, with that out of the way, the future that I see you guys have built and are building is just to highlight the importance even more, which it's already incredibly important is, so when you go to the doctor and you have a health condition or even the preceding that, like the optimization of health before you even get there, when it comes to medicine, where medicine is now, it's okay, you have high blood pressure. I'm going to give you this, diuretic or whatever it may be, losartan or who knows what, right? But the fact is, all of the omic layers should be evaluated to see the drug that's being given, the net effect systemically, and then actually picking the best drug based on all of the omic layers, right? So now we don't live in that time yet, but what you guys have built and are building makes me think that that's the road where all of this is heading.
Yeah, I definitely think so. It's one of the areas that we're really diving in the lab. In fact, we just got a first paper drafted on this, so we'll send this out soon. But we've been building in some of these data sets. We have different health metrics that utilize a lot of the, really dense data. We've been using something called Mahalanobis distance, which is just a fancy way of computing like distances in space. And one of the really interesting things that you can do is you can identify for individuals not just like how they're different on clinical labs, but then you can look at all this high dimensional data. And what you'll find is that even for individuals who have maybe one or two out of range clinical labs, by this high dimensional analysis, you find quite a big spectrum of people that you think are much healthier than you would expect and much unhealthier. We still need to validate all this, right? It's all early. But the point I want to make is just that we can already compute very interesting signals out of that really dense data, trying to understand like these whispers or these like smaller, subtle issues. And so we have a whole family of things that can make predictions about relative health in populations that have similar clinical lab data. So the next step is obviously going to be to validate that out, and we're talking with a number of different groups. We're very engaged with the United Arab Emirates and their the Emirati Genome Program there. We're exploring a lot with some of the big cohorts here in the U.S. We've got some company cohorts that may be interesting. So there's a lot to do there. But there's no doubt like a really strong future, I think, for the omics data. It's just a function of getting through, the gauntlet of regular, of proof points and stuff that you've got to go through to get that to practice.
So
And
as Yep.
for what it's worth, it's one of the things that we're really interested for HealthSpan Horizons. We're working this through with the IRB, but one of the things we want to do with this system is actually enable people who are really into this to be able to bring that kind of omics data and so forth, do it under a research context, right? They understand it's research, it's not, for medical or anything, but it will start to give us a lot of the kind of data that we need to learn about those interactions, prove it out so that they can actually translate eventually. So, we're excited about that.
Nice. So a limitation of that though is, what populate, so the published data on various omic related studies and whether it even translates to someone who's generally healthy and looking to delay disease risk and slow aging rate or whatever. So for example, so I've tested my metabolome 25 times using Michael Snyder's. Yeah, I don't know how
That's great.
that's just the tip of the iceberg. I've got about 70 blood tests going back to 2015, 20 oral microbiome tests, and I've tracked diet using a food scale, like 99% of my diet going back also to 2015. So basically, I've been using a rudimentary approach statistically to try to derive what is the optimal diet, what is the personalized approach based on trying to optimize all of these biomarkers. But I'm starting to have a really tough time, especially with the omics, oral microbiome and metabolome. So I've got 623 metabolites and 25 tests. I can pinpoint a select few of those, but again, as you know, that's the reductionist approach. I want to look at net broad shifts, right? So um, a challenge, I guess, is where I was going with this is, you know, for stuff that's known, for example, the gut bacteria metabolites and doxyl sulfate, pericrystal sulfate, TMAO, it's pretty obvious what you want. Lower is better, avoid age-related change. But then there's so many metabolites and metabolite classes. I mean, even just triglycerides, there's like 200 different triglycerides, and there's like no published data. Maybe you have 3 studies in total that exist worldwide. So a challenge too would be like, what's already known in large population-based studies to use all of the omic layers to try to guide decisions. Or maybe you don't even need that. Maybe you just have you have a exposome profile and all of the omic layers that go along with that in youth. And then you're looking at entropy-based shifts over time rather than looking at singular metabolites. I don't know. What do you think?
Yeah, there's a couple of ways that we've looked at that. So one is we've looked at things like just in metabolomics data, uh, outliers, right? So just defining outliers as, being at the extremes of a statistical distribution for a healthy population. One thing that you can do is you can just look at those as people get older, and the number of those outliers just clicks up over time. Like, so we've got studies where we've looked at that, and you just see the disorder mount. So you can get like some non-specific to, like non-marker based types of approaches to just kind of start to observe like the increase in disorder, right? So that's one. We have built some network analysis techniques as well that measure disorder. So that's another way you can get at it. And then coming back to this, Mahalanobis distance that I mentioned, this MD, this work is quite interesting because what we're actually doing there is taking cohorts that we know something about their health on different axes, um, whether it be inflammatory health, metabolic health, and so forth. And just statistically, we're learning different directionalities in that space that align with health in different ways. So you can do this interesting machine learning of breaking out these data. So you can use like the standard clinical labs kind of as a Rosetta Stone to try to understand what's happening in all the dense data. But then you can refine your predictions for individuals based on that alignment. I don't know if that's clear enough. I'm pretty soon I'm going to start having a nice slide deck around this. I got to get it a little bit more buttoned up to get it out there, but it's those are all really interesting avenues of where you can dive into this. And it's another reason we're excited about HealthSpan Horizons, because what we need is to get a lot of people like yourself, right, that are making like all these measurements and studies and doing it, for your own health purposes. But the more that we can gather data of that kind, including from, functional medicine type clinics or wherever, wherever people want to come and share their journeys, if we utilize de-identified data from a lot of individuals' journeys, we should be able to put together a lot of this information. But we can't get there unless we have a lot of data on healthy people, and that's what's always been a little bit low. Now, there are some extensions to things like the Olivis program in the United States that should be helpful to that. There's things that are happening in other countries, including the UAE, the UK, and so forth. Like it's starting to come, but we've got quite a long way to go.
Another challenge would be how many data points would you need on a person for even just clinical labs per year for it to be biologically meaningful and actionable? So, if most people at best, maybe they test once a year. I mean, I've used this analogy before. Like if you're a baseball player and you hit 4 home runs in one game and then no home runs for the rest of the year, if you only focus on that one game, are you the world's greatest home run hitter? What's the full context, right? So then the question is, how many tests would you need per year for it to be a true representation of year to year change? And then all of the track data that goes along with that. So what are your thoughts on how often people should be generating their own, just even clinical labs? Forget about the omic layers for that.
Yeah, it really depends. I mean, the thing to really understand is the variability in these measures. Like the biological age measure is an interesting case, because you get quite a bit of fluctuation in those kind of measures, and that's even trying to get something that's stable across a clinical lab measure. And so the more you get that right, the more you do a repeat, you really get a sense of the slope, right? And you get a sense of dynamic change as well. Like when I was going through the Araville program in Scientific Wellness, when we used to run that, I remember, like my omega-3s were just dropping off the face of the earth for some reason. I had to like really ramp up to get it to turn around. And so you start to see like a dynamic picture. So for people that really want to get into this, I think getting a measurement a few times a year is probably the best thing. It's still relevant. I mean, it's still useful even if people do once a year, right? I mean, you still get even that cross-sectional, you get something about what are you deficient in, and that's not meaningless. So that one thing I do want to be clear on is there's value add as you unlock and you get a lot more data, you can start to say a lot more. Um, but even having something is a lot better than nothing.
Yeah. So another challenge. It's like I'm bringing up all the challenges, right? So uh,
There's plenty of
evaluating.
them.
Yeah, I know. When you think about family history, obviously that would probably be the first place to start when someone's trying to optimize health. Because if you ignore that, I mean, that's just, so for example, cardiovascular disease, top three cause of death. I can come up with, based on my own correlations and calorie adjusted associations, which I can do very easily now instead of doing it one biomarker at a time in Excel. Now I've got, ChatGPT, I can do, as many as I'd like. But so if I optimize for CVD risk, so lowest lipoprotein A, lowest LDL, lowest triglycerides, um, lowest HSCRP, HbA1c, blood pressure, all of that, right? So that phenotype, that diet that underlies that, higher HDL, it may optimize other biomarkers, and I won't go through the list. But in tracking my own data, I'm starting to see things like DHEA sulfate, which decline during aging. I mean, the androgens, as you know, precipitously decline. Like when you think about one of the strongest biomarker groups that precipitously decline, the androgens, DHEA sulfate is one example of that. So I've noticed that my data was stable for about 20 tests over 3 years. And then as soon as I modified my diet, try to lower lipoprotein A, which is not genetically immovable. I mean, I've had data as high as 145 nanomolar to 70 nanomolar. So there is that leeway, but going back to your point about genetic risk, it's not going to get to 16 nanomolar. I'd be shocked if I can move it that low. But anyway, the diet that optimizes my CVD risk and lowest risk weighted ApoB may be pushing my DHEA sulfate at this accelerated rate where I had values around 125, and now I'm seeing like 85, 75, 70 consistently, where if you trend line the data, it was flat and then a steep drop off. So how do you guys think about that? Where, is this a net overall score where you've got a certain amount of clinical labs and metabolites and all of the omic layers, and if your diet and an exposome is X, you'll see this positive change, but you will see some of these things also moving in the wrong direction. Is that the best way we can think about this, or is there a way where we can optimize it all simultaneously?
Yeah, um, I love this question, and it's exactly the issue. That's why I don't love the notion, even though I showed like a result on biological age, I don't love this notion of like the health score. There's so many different axes, and biology is all about trade-offs. Like everything you do in health is a trade-off. It's so hard in any like real complex system to have something be 100% positive, right? It just almost doesn't happen. And so this is why I think, breadth of measurement and having dense measurements, like for exactly the reason you gave, right? It's like because if all you're looking at is a few markers, you think, oh, I'm optimizing cardiovascular health, and you don't know that you're tanking your testosterone because you just don't you don't have none of the building blocks and you're just starving yourself of what you need and all those kind of things. We see this in disease a lot as well. I spoke at a meeting that Paul Allen sponsored before his death, some years ago, and it was all about cancers and Alzheimer's and how there's so many things that increase the, if it protects you from cancer, it tends to increase Alzheimer's and vice versa. We had this whole symposium about these trade-offs. A good example of that is your mitochondria, right? So revving up your mitochondria, having a lot of energy generation, which is good for your brain, like that's good for staving off neuronal death. However, every single time you churn that thing, right, you spin out an oxidative radical that has a chance to mutate your DNA and give you more cancer. So it's like you sort of can't win. This is why I think that doing this in a holistic way, very personalized, and understanding like where you're at, right? Because there's a trade-off. Like maybe you have incredibly low risk for Alzheimer's, therefore the cancer risk is really more important. Maybe you have maybe you're the opposite, right? So I think understanding like where you're at and the magnitude of those trade-offs and what's a smart trade-off for you is what really matters. And in some cases, you can actually compensate, right? It might be, oh, all the stuff you're doing in CVD is great, but you better make sure that some slice of what you're doing really addresses the core issue. So it gets into all of that. I don't know, Sherry, if you want to add to that at all, but that's
No, you nailed it.
Wait, so I had other challenges too. So diet, I noticed that diet it's not yet included. And I guess that's probably the hardest variable to track for most people as they're not weighing all their food and entering those data. I mean, in theory, you can, and not just that, I mean, you've got the wearables and most of the wearables provide like an average daily heart rate. You could even look at HRV, resting heart rate, and then the average daily heart rate is a metric of maybe you're overtraining. And if you cut back on that, because I have a Whoop and its recommendations are terrible. I mean, I pay no attention to it. Sleep, how to optimize my HRV, terrible. And I think that's pretty ubiquitous across wearables. So are there plans to add diet as a layer to the algorithm?
Yeah, Sherry, do you want to take that one? You ran a nutrition company.
Sure. Yeah. I think so. I think I believe nutrition is such an important layer to holistic wellness of everybody. And I previously built a platform around the genomics and nutritional genomics footprints for all. And I link that with metabolic health and longitudinal habit changing and all. So it's I think not only it's part of it, it could be at the center of how we drive personalized, very tailored regimen for individual and engage them with, right? And as you know, food is it's a personal thing and it's a communal thing and it's a cultural thing. It's you can touch their core. But to your, I think what you shared, Michael, is also resonant with my experience building Genopilot before, that people they hate to log in their food because it's taking away the food is joy of life away from that, right? So it's one of the reasons I was studying obesity genomics at the medical college. There's no 1 pound thrown out of a window, according to my brilliant physician, scientist peers. That is from the cold and clinical setting to treat overweight. Overweight and weight issues and so on should be treated from outside of the clinics in many people's views, including myself. So all that said, I just think we have to have a personalized nutrition solution or strategy for everybody in order to really move the needles on health span. But that's probably not going to be centered around logging every calorie you're going to take.
But it would
Yeah,
help.
I tend to also think that most people won't. I know you do, Mike, which is great. So we got to get some people in that want to log. So I love that. I would like to find some more passive ways to get at that if we can. We haven't put it into Compass yet. We do have in the core underlying system, there is a capability to take pictures and estimate calories. We haven't deployed that at all, but part of a platform that that we worked with before has a capability like that. So it is in there. We just haven't brought it forward. So there is that. There might be better things. I've always been quite interested in whether or not there could be a service, and maybe you know of one that would do something like analysis of credit card data or something like this, where it could pull, where it masks like all the, financial details you don't want to give to anyone, but it does like a blinded nutritional assessment that you can then, connect to a health device or something like that. It's very imperfect because it doesn't really know if you ate what you bought, and it doesn't know if you bought it for yourself or your kids or whatever. But that said, it's noisy, but it's got some signal in it. And especially in the era of LLMs, I could imagine you could it'd be easy enough to tell it a few things, right? Because it would say like, okay, here's what I learned about your diet, and you say, well, Oreos are in there, but I don't actually eat them. I'm there for my kids, or whatever it is, right? And so I actually think that some of these passive ways, especially with the new AI systems and your ability to talk to it and like tell it some context, you could probably hone in on something that is not terrible, right? Better, better than nothing. And so, um, yeah, I think it's incredibly useful. The other element is how much can we say out of a metabolome and things of that nature. It's fairly transient, which is hard. One really interesting thing is your hair. So you can do nutritional analysis apparently along the length of your hair and get access to information about what you've been eating. So, I have short hair, so I could get maybe a month or two. Maybe Sherry could get herself a year or something. You're cut out of luck, Mike, but it's
There we go.
but it's like, we've got, but that's another sort of interesting aspect that I've seen. There was, um, yeah, Victoria Orphan at Caltech does some of those kind of analyses and so forth. So there's some cool things you can do.
Body weight could be another one. I don't know to include if people are, so if they've got their smart scale and if it can, export that data, and then now you can align that with wearables and clinical labs, whatever, and just even look at average body weight test to test and see how, as a proxy for basically calorie intake. And I'm assuming that would, be the biggest needle mover, at least in my data, for more biomarkers moving in the right direction versus wrong. I look forward to the day where I don't have to log anything. Like I've got, I just put the food on the scale uploads it to the cloud. Like I've got my wearable data, everything goes to the cloud, and then I literally get the personalized recommendations that morning, which it's exhausting to do that. I just don't have the time to crunch all the numbers and make plots and all that
Totally.
now.
And that's what we're so excited about these kind of systems, that all of that is coming, right? And it's coming pretty fast. I mean, it's not, I mean, it's a race is on, to try to build all these things. It's such a fun time to be in computational biology right now too, because the pace at which you can do everything is so much faster than it used to be. So everything you used to think about, all right, we got to, go through this for a year. Now it's like, all right, we're going to do a 2 week sprint and build this piece and then that piece. And so everything's getting better so fast. Um, it is access to context, though, that really drives so much of it. If things are available digitally, they're easy to get to, they're easy to kind of deploy. We're going to have, exponentially rising ability to analyze and do all that. And it's all those little pieces that you don't know. And that's why these textual back and forths are so important, though, because the fact that you can now talk to the algorithm, talk to the system and say, hey, this is great, except you really don't understand this piece. You're really messing this up. And it has some ability now to understand that. It's just such a game changer. I think we joke about it, those of us that were involved in founding Aravel and doing that, back in the day, our first scientific wellness. It's like, if we had a magic box that could, like do personalization, as all the stuff we have today would have seemed back then. It's pretty amazing.
So no, that's an interesting point with the back and forth with LLMs, because you'll get a subset of people, and I don't want to say most people right now, they'll type in and then get an answer. And then whether it's, their own cognitive biases will accept it at face value because they got an answer. That's what they were kind of hoping for anyway, rather than, having the education in the background to actually challenge the AI and be like, no, that's not at, but most people don't have that background, right? So, you hear all this stuff about, AI and robots are going to take our jobs and all this stuff. But the fact is, I still see that there's going to be a need for, the biological interpretation of high level data, even after getting the AI to crunch all the numbers, like an AI consultant almost. I don't know. What are your thoughts? Yeah.
Yeah, that's probably the most important question in the world right now, which is what's going to happen for these things. At least so far, at least so far, you really need humans in the loop on these things. Like there's a lot of stuff you can get out, and I do have quite a big belief in our ability to kind of go to various different levels of abstraction. And AIs have not really shown to do that quite yet, I would argue. They have obviously superhuman capabilities in all kinds of different ways. Um, I think, my bias is I think that's going to accelerate us into just being able to attack problems that we couldn't otherwise do. So I'm for the most part excited about it, right? We all want to remain, relevant. So far it hasn't, so far, jobs continue to go up. We're doing new things. We're teaching ourselves, new sort of new ways to go about problems. So, so far, I think that, that all seems very much to the positive. It is hard to, forecast exactly what goes off it. I mean, one of the things that I think about a lot, though, is even, one of my, outside of the chat bots, one of my daily experiences with AI is, it's my self-driving car, right? And it's interesting to watch that because I love it. I mean, I love the notion that I can just sort of be on a call and focused and my car is going to drive it and I don't really have to worry about it knows where it's going and it's fine. I think that's an incredible. And yet there's all these things that are just adjacent to that, right? Like minor things, like there's a certain turn where I want it to go right instead of left. And I've made that change 200 times in a row. It will never, ever understand that because it doesn't have an ability to do local learning at this point. There's a certain anyway, there's a couple like minor switches, right? And the reason I bring that up is not, because that's just an arcane detail about my life, I think about it quite a lot because for all the depth of that AI system and doing what it doesn't have any clue of anything adjacent to it, right? It will never like, just understand like why I want it to, go right so it can take the light to make a turn instead of doing a left turn when it's a blind curve where you can barely see. Like it does, there's no forecasting in it. There's not the chatbot that you're doing doesn't understand anything about, you know, where it sits or the room it's in or like that. Like there's, and I think there's for the people that kind of very glibly think that, oh, humans are going to be totally replaced. I mean, the AIs are getting better exponentially. I mean, there's no doubt about that. I mean, I understand the argument for sure, but I do think at least in the shorter run, there's an underestimation of the amount of context and just general things that we take for granted. And so I do think these things are going to be incredibly powerful, but I don't think, yeah, I don't see humans like not having a place in that world. Um, at least as far in the horizon as I can see. That might be wishful thinking, but that I do think that.
So,
One of the
yep.
one of the most exciting things that we're building, and as part of the mission we're on for the world, is being the guardrail partner to the health information, the literature, the evidence. How do we help individuals sift through a very complex, landscape of all these evolving, exploding information out there? Is part of the layer we're building. We talk about the trust layer that the campus is really focusing on. And we have a whole team, a function right now every day working on what is the validation framework and how do we filter in and out, different levels of with confidence, the scientific evidence that we can equip individuals with caution, right? Some are, fully usable for your daily use, and some probably you need to just keep in mind and maybe useful down the road, but we need more, studies to show the evidence for. So I think having the standards such as bugs and such as Price Lab and Horizons is a critical layer and to build something really useful for healthspan.
Are there plans to also have like kind of an agentic layer where, so to Nathan's point about the Tesla, I'm guessing it's Tesla, I have the same. I know
Yeah,
the
yeah.
experience. So are there plans to have it like be agentic on the fly where you don't have to rely on whenever Elon sends the latest software update to maybe make that right turn that you wanted to make, where you correct it once and then now it's making that turn all of a sudden. So are there plans to have an agentic side on in Compass where it's learning on the fly, like it's taking my immediate data. I don't have to wait for an update, you know what I mean, to give me the recommendations immediately?
Yes. Yeah. So we do have, and in fact, the demo has, some of those capabilities now where you can ask it follow up questions and it can do graphs and it can do those kind of things. I would say that level of experience is okay now. We really want to improve that as we go forward. It's better, at the kind of things that I showed at the moment. But there'll be a lot of optimization around that. We want to do a lot of learning as we start having, more users come on board. Right now, it's really done on all these data cases that we have from people that come before. We're still getting we got to work through HIPAA and all that stuff to start absorbing people's data, which we're hoping to have done by this fall. And so it's yeah, but the idea is to have it be agentic and learning. And then in those two AI systems I talked about, I guess I didn't get into this as much as I usually do. The idea is for Compass people to come in, learn, utilize it, play with their own data, and then to donate those data de-identified for analysis, and then Synthesizer, that other side. What Synthesizer is going to do is just be an automated system that's just trying to learn from those de-identified journeys as much as possible, right? So when we talk about this, you know, Mahalanobis distance kind of thing we talked about, or this, where we're trying to measure these. Well, if we have a bunch of people who are actually uploading some, genome, some metabolomics and proteomics, we're going to try to fundraise some from the government too to, be able to, add those onto like layers of data that people might, have been doing just through their, own wellness journeys. But to the extent that we can layer on those kind of data, we can start to learn that, right? And the system will automate that. So it's a virtuous cycle, right? So then when we learn things in Synthesizer that come out, that can come back to tell people, we can see kind of what happens as they're, interacting with that. And then the beauty of these systems is that back and forth, because there's such an opportunity for individuals, even in the context of having the chat, just to, retort back like, this makes no sense. Like, why is it telling me this? Like this, we'll learn from all that, right? So we want it to really be a community effort, hoping to, make it easier for people to say, hey, I'm on this like individual path. Is there ways that we can pull it together? And then by having individuals in this system, with HealthSpan Horizons, what we're also looking to get is to set up ways so that we can get, blood samples and things like this, even into just biobank, where we can then go fundraise either to philanthropy or government or whatever and say, okay, we've got all this, blood and genomic data and wearables and stuff that people are doing, add on money to do proteomics and epigenetics and metabolomics, and we'll build out, what we hope will be one of the great data sets of the world for understanding health span. That's what we're really trying to catalyze with the community project.
Nice. So genetics. So of all the omic layers, I've placed the least value on genetics. And I know you guys have placed a lot of value on the genetics, but I've placed the least value on not just the human genetics, but the microbial, genetics, genes that are there, only because it's the prediction of what can happen and not necessarily what is happening. Instead, so looking at the actual biomarkers, I have the same opinion now on the epigenetics too, where it's just a prediction of, like, for example, Dunedin pace is It's a prediction of, I think, 17 biomarkers, actual clinical chemistry biomarkers, their epigenetic prediction. So I started measuring all 17 biomarkers instead of the epigenetic prediction. I want to know what the real data shows, as
Yeah, yeah.
opposed to. So within that context, you guys are having me reconsider my mindset on that, being able to, if I knew ahead of time based on my genetics with all of the other data that I have, it could provide more insight into, you're banging you're banging your head off the wall trying to move this biomarker in the right direction, resist age-related change. But man, your PGS for that biomarker you're already somewhat shooting in the
Yeah,
dark. You
it's
don't,
like it's very unlikely for you to move. So
yeah,
that's where I am too, because I think as long as it was genetics only, I tend to agree, right? Genetics only is not like the omics that I would really, dive in on the most. But genetics in context of all the other things, and it gives you a sense of trade-offs, right? What should you be super worried about because you're at really high risk? How does that manifest? What are I didn't put it in this talk. I kind of dropped it for time, but we went and took 54 different genetic risk conditions, and then we looked at all the correlations in the blood of what's different from people with high and low risk for those diseases. This is all in a PNAS paper in 2020, I think, if people want to look at it. But it's, and it will go through. And it's quite striking. Like if you look uh, at genetic risk for coronary artery disease, and then you look at hundreds of proteins in the blood and you see what's different in the blood of individuals as a function of their genetic risk for coronary artery disease.
PCSK9.
One.
Yeah.
PCSK9, that's right. That's it, right? Maybe that's it. That's the only one, right? So it's like, yeah, exactly. And so I like that kind of approach with the genetics because it gives us a chance to see what are likely the earliest differences. And at least I don't have a data set to put a p-value on this or something, but by eyeballing it, a lot of those things are causal. A lot of them are drug targets. A lot of that, I think there's quite a lot of signal in those earliest differences. And
So
they're not hundreds or thousands of them. There's like a tiny number of them. They're small.
to play the other side of that, so especially on the PCSK9 story.
Mhm.
So there are published studies showing that centenarians have relatively high lipoprotein. So PCSK9 is going to reduce lipoprotein. It's going to reduce LDL too, as lipoprotein is a fraction of LDL. But they're getting to centenarian status with relatively high lipoprotein. So, now it comes back to that, that weighing risk story of, okay, maybe I've got something that will have genetically high or relatively high lipoprotein A. Maybe only looking at the genetics within that context isn't the only part of the story. Maybe looking to see, do I have atherosclerosis? And if I don't have atherosclerosis, imagine if I looked at,
Yes, yes.
yeah,
Yeah,
right. Yeah.
totally. Because that's the worry. But then if it's like, okay, it's creeping up, but your vein, right, you've done your scans and your veins are just like beautiful.
Yeah.
That would be included in the sort of trade-off decisions, right? So there's so much to optimize on these paths.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, you guys are great. I appreciate the time. This was great. So thanks, Nathan and Sherry. I'm looking forward to everything you guys produce. I'm a huge fan. So uh, thanks for coming on, and I hope to host you guys again at some point.
Yeah, my pleasure. Mike, this was terrific. It was great to talk to you. I really enjoyed all your insights here at the end too. So we'll definitely have to
Yeah,
connect.
try Compass and let us know. What do you think?
Yeah, 100%. Like I said, I'm getting to the
You'll
point now.
upload your data and it will break the whole system. It'll be so much.
Right, exactly.
All right, guys. That was great. Have a great day.
Yeah. Thanks, Mike.
Bye.
Bye.